Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I got a special guest on the line with me today, G. Edward Griffin. I don't need to give much of an introduction for him because I know you're all very well familiar with him. He's with freedomforceinternational.org. He's the founder and chairman of the the entity, and he's a writer, documentary, film producer, and he's someone who got very popular for writing The Creature from Jekyll Island. And we're going to discuss with him his thoughts on the economy. We're also going to get his thoughts on climate change. I know this is a hot topic right now, no pun intended, with what's going on with California, the historic wildfires, major heat waves going on here. And then I'd even like to get into cancer and health. So without any further ado, Mr. G. Edward Griffin, thanks for coming on Crush the Street.
Well, Kenneth, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sir, with the headline numbers down, with what's coming up on the economy, headline numbers, the economy seems strong, right? 4.1% growth on GDP, jobs, tremendous amount of jobs being created, and Apple on its way and already becoming a $1 trillion company, the world's first $1 trillion company. People are not worried about any sort of recession. In fact, they're throwing the towel in on precious metals. Just with that prompt, I'd like to get your thoughts on the economy and kind of how you see things playing out as it pertains to what we're seeing in 2018.
Well, Kenneth, I probably should preface my response to that by saying that I have become, I guess the best word to describe myself is to say I've become a contrarian. In almost everything I look at the world today, really important issues, it seems like whatever seems to be the current wisdom, I am very suspicious about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're reading about it in the New York Times and the Washington Post or on your nightly news, it's probably not news anymore, or it's probably twisted or propaganda more than news. That's my mindset because for many, many years I've been following how reality is being distorted in the minds of the average, not only the American, but citizens all around the world. The perception of reality is the important thing nowadays. It's, for example, is the economy good or bad? Does it really make any difference? It's what people think is important. If they think the economy is good, well, then they're very happy with their political leaders. They're very happy with everything, even though they themselves may be not doing too well. Well, how can they complain? It must be them because, look, all of the news pundits are saying the economy is up. The stock market is up. And Apple is growing and so forth. But however, their standard of living keeps dropping. There are more people, maybe it looks like the unemployment rate has gone down. That's only because they've rigged the figures and they've taken out a lot of people who have stopped looking for work. If you stop looking for work, technically now the government says, well, you're not unemployed anymore because you weren't looking for work. You might have been looking for it for 10 years and couldn't have found a good job. And now you quit. You say, well, I just live off of welfare. Now you're not unemployed anymore, you see. So they have ways of adjusting all of the figures. And the stock market goes up primarily because the Federal Reserve System and the plunge protection team spends all this hidden money putting huge transfusions of capital into favored companies like Apple so that their stock goes up. And everybody says, oh, look, the economy is good. But meanwhile, people are struggling. Their standard of living is going down. It takes two people now earning a living to do what a couple of generations ago required only one breadwinner. Kids don't have parents anymore. They're working parents, and they see them at night when the television is on. Everybody's watching the television programs. The family is getting splintered because two people are working. I could go on. And so when you ask me, what do I think about the popular wisdom today that the economy is really good, I am not so convinced that it is. I think it looks good. It's the perception because that's what we see in our news media. They want us to think it's good, so we'll be content with everything and not be not be so much interested in some kind of fundamental change. One of the things that interests me most is um, how the establishment, let's just call it the establishment for now, because this has nothing to do with Republicans versus Democrats. Um, some there's a trend now for some people to call this the deep state, which is not a bad state for it. I mean, not a bad name for it, because these are hidden forces, very powerful forces, not just in the government, but in the corporate world as well, and in the media, in the educational system, in the judicial system, in the military, all of that. There are these powerful forces that spend a lot of time and a lot of money trying to create the perception of reality, which when you really get to it and look at the facts, the perception is not the same as reality. That's because they want people to be content with their state. One of the things that the deep state or this hidden force does not want is for people to say, wait a minute, we're being played for suckers. We've been pwned, So I often wonder why the deep state, if it is really as opposed to President Trump as it says it is. I mean, they do a lot of things that sound very bad in the press. It doesn't really seem to hurt him any, but they are always talking about how much they hate Trump and they're going to get Trump, but they don't get him. They just create the illusion of this great popular. No, not popular. This great insider opposition to the current, the current group in power. The administration is what I was trying to say, and yet they don't really do anything. The administration still has all the hangovers from the former administration. They've got. Even Trump's top advisors are working against him, but they never nothing really happens. But there's this perception. There's a perception that of reality, which in my view is not the accurate perception. I guess that's all I'm trying to say.
Sure.
I'm skeptical about the economy being that great. It's not that great. First of all, nobody wants to look at inflation. Inflation is rampant. How can the economy be great? Sure, the stock market is going up. The profits are going up. Why is that? Because they're measuring that in dollar numbers. In terms of purchasing power, it's not going up. In other words, years ago, I bought a home for $31,500, and I thought that was a huge amount of money, and I didn't know how I was going to make the payments on it. Today, I don't know what it would sell for, but probably 500,000 or something like that. Well, look at all the money I made, right? No. If you go back to the year in which I bought that first house, and figured out how many half-pound hamburgers I would have been able to buy with that same amount of money, and then look at today and the same house at its current price, and you know what? It'll buy exactly the same number of half-pound hamburgers. So the value hasn't gone up one bit. So this is part of the delusion that we live in. And we say, oh, look, everything is wonderful. Stock market is going up, but it's going up in terms of these things called dollars. And the value of the dollars are going down. So there's so many things to look at. If you get to be kind of skeptical, like I am in my old age, I've heard all of these I'm going to call them lies. I've heard these before, and people are always fall for them because Americans are always suckers for good news. I don't care what it is. They say, well, things are good. Oh, they believe it. That's wonderful. And so what more can I say? I'm just sort of ranting on with this, but I'm not so convinced. I guess the short answer is, Kenneth, that I'm not so convinced that the economy is as rosy as they say.
Yeah, you know what? And I was talking to David Morgan this morning through an interview, and that'll be posted shortly here. But he mentioned something. He made the analogy the Titanic has already been hit. It already hit the iceberg. It's filling up with water. Sure, you can go from the bottom of the boat into first class. The band can play louder. They can still serve drinks and do everything. But that's kind of what's happening now is the band is playing louder and many things happening. But the iceberg has already been hit. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on there. And so, what are you suggesting? What are your thoughts on how people should approach the economy in this current environment? And after you answer that, I'd like to move over into climate change.
Well, when you say how people should approach it, I guess it depends on what people we're talking about. The reality is that most people, I don't know what that number is, but in excess of 80% of the population for sure, uh, can do nothing about it because they don't really want to do anything about it. They don't think that it's their business. They're too complacent. They're too passive. They'll say, well, that's the way it is. You can't fight City Hall, you know. You just got to go with the flow, make the best of it. They can't do anything because they're convinced in their mind that it's not their business to do anything. They just hope it all turns out well. So 80% of the people, there's nothing they can do. They're just going to go and flow with whatever happens and take the consequences. Now, in the remainder of that group, there's a small number of people, probably around 3%, that like it just the way it's going, and they're happy with it. They're going to do everything they can to see that it continues. Those would be the people who are profiting from it. That's the military-industrial complex. Those are the politicians, all of the people that are living off of government grants and off of taxes, the welfare class, everybody that's getting something from other people's toil. They like it just exactly the way it is. So they're not going to do anything to change it. Now that leaves another 3%, perhaps. I like to think of myself in that little group, that we don't like it because not only is it getting very, very uncomfortable and unfair today in our lives, but the trend is such that it's moving. It's not a static condition. It's getting worse by the day, by the week. And so you don't have to be a genius to project that into the future to realize that in a very short period of time, perhaps a year or two, this whole thing is just coming apart. The wheels are coming off, and it's going to be horrible for everybody except maybe that little 3% that are, at the top of the pyramid, and they're going to live off of the tax dole somehow, or off of the inflation ripoff that the banks have created. So the bankers will do well, the politicians will do well, and the friends of the bankers and the politicians, of course, those who service them, and everybody else is going to go down the drain. So what can you do? I think for the three of us, now I'm talking to that group, the 3% of us had better get busy because we know we have to do something. And the first thing we have to do is understand what the cause is. Just reading the news is not going to tell us what the cause is. The news is going to pull wool over our eyes, make us think that, well, it's inflation, for example, is caused because farmers are getting too much money for their crops, or because they need more subsidy or something. The solutions that the government is always going to propose involves more power to the government and more taxes. So if you expect the government to solve any problem in the world, you know how they're going to solve it. They're going to say, give us more power and give us more money. And of course, then things will get worse. So it's up to us, the 3% who are not riding the gravy train, to do something about it. But before we know what to do about it, we have to understand it. So you're talking about the economy. We have to understand this thing called the Federal Reserve System, because that is the engine of inflation. It's the engine by which money is created out of nothing, or even worse, it's created out of debt. And so the more money you have in circulation, that means the more debt you have. The more debt you have, that means the more interest is being siphoned out of the economy and into the pockets of the people who loan that money. That's the banks. And since the banks made the money out of nothing that they loaned, they're collecting interest on nothing. And that's a short circuit, a dead short circuit across the economy. You're never going to get a good, healthy economy unless you get rid of that mechanism. And most people don't even understand it. Even the 3% of us that are concerned about it and want to do something about it, most of those people don't understand what they're up against. So the first step is education. The next step is organization. The next step is a strategy. And the next step is to replace all these people in positions of political power who have been legalizing this gigantic plunder, and replace them with people who have no axe to grind except to restore the system to prosperity and freedom once again. That's a lot. It's simple, but it's not so easy. And of course, that's the thing to which I've devoted my life for the many years now is building that movement.
Well, you've certainly created a movement. I would imagine most of the alternative media owes a great deal of gratitude to the path that you basically set people on. You know, you've opened the eyes to so many people, and I think we're very grateful for that. And basically, we're asking questions, and that's what people need to do, is ask questions. And the frustration that I'm having with the mainstream shutting down Alex Jones, this is recent news, in InfoWars on Google and YouTube and Facebook, and this collaborative effort to shut him down. It's unbelievable. There's attempt to control people from allowing to have free speech is very concerning. Disagree or agree with the guy, it's a very frustrating thing. But I think it's positive that people are asking questions, and I'm grateful for that. So with that, I have a question for you. You know, we're getting historic heat, record July, and you know, this August time period here in California. 2 weeks Within 2 weeks, we had major heat waves uh, come across California, and as temperatures around the globe continue to accelerate, extreme heat events like these are becoming more and more frequent, attributing the fires to this. Many are attributing even the California fires to this. Now, I was reading someone else's words when I said that global temperatures continue to accelerate. This is what I'm reading on the headline. But I know you've done a lot of work to debunk much of this and to expose why much of this is man-made for the purpose of, you know, separating people from their property, separating people from their tax dollars. So by way of just prompting you, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, you're quite right. That has been a major theme of mine now for quite some time. And it's a perfect example, Kenneth, of what I was talking about a moment ago, that the perception of reality is far removed from reality itself. If you can dominate the media, if you can dominate those headlines that we all read, if you can dominate the talking points and the news stories and the feature articles, you can turn an absolute lie into, as far as the public is concerned, something that is so true that it's absurd to even question it, because everywhere you go to read about it, it says the same thing. And surely not everybody could be wrong. You know, there's that kind of a thing. Well, this is a perfect example. I read it, of course, like everybody else, headline after headline, especially from the major news sources. Global warming on the uptake, hurricanes increasing, heat waves expanding, and all of that. Oh my gosh, it's really happening. The icebergs are melting in Antarctica and all of that. And you think, oh my gosh, this is really happening. But then if you have the temerity to go and actually look at the data, look at the data that is behind those stories, look at the reports and analyze them for yourself, you'll find out that just the opposite is true. It's incredible that just the opposite is true. Right now, we are entering into the early stages of a global cooling phase. Right now, the heat waves are retreating. Right now, although some ice fields are expanding at one end of the pole, they're decreasing, I should say, at one end of the pole, they're expanding at the other end of the pole. And if you put the two together and measure the total ice, it's expanding. If you look at the polar bears, the population is bigger now of the polar bears than ever before in history. Every fact that you can come across, if you dig down and look at the data that's behind it, you come to the amazing conclusion that this is a well-orchestrated propaganda campaign. Now, why? Why would they do something like that? Well, you know, they say follow the motive, and it's usually money, and in this case, it certainly is. There is a huge agenda to scare the people of the world into meekly accepting massive government programs to solve this real issue. Now, we've got to save the planet, right? There's no amount of money that you can spend that's too much to save the planet. We got to think about the future for our kids and our grandkids and so forth. Well, they'll be living in, if they live at all, they'll be living in a horrible, desolate place. Money is not an issue. All of that sort of thing, and they play upon your emotions. So they're trying to scare people into thinking that if we don't do something to solve this global warming trend, which does not exist, but if you think it exists, you're willing to do all of these draconian, take these draconian measures. You pay any amount of money, you give up any amount of personal freedom, and then you look at the people who are promoting this myth. And every one of them at the top, now not the average person that's reading the headlines and believing it, but the people at the top who are altering the data and creating this false narrative, all of them have a motive, and that's to expand government power and government taxes, because that's how they get their bread and butter. It's their livelihood to plunder everybody else. And the best way to get people to not object to any amount of tax or not object to any amount of personal regulation in your lives or in your industry and your habits. The only way to do that is to scare people to think, well, we've got to do this in order to save the planet. It's as simple as that. And of course, the people who, like I was a little while ago, people who have bought into the myth, it's pretty hard to say, oh, that can't be true. They got to say that. It's pretty hard to believe that. But let me tell you, folks, that if you just dig into the data and look at the source of the data, look who's putting it out, check out their credibility, see what their record has been, see if they have some kind of a hidden agenda or if there is some kind of conflict of interest. You'll find it all over the place. The bottom line is that the global warming scenario is a myth, and it's a politically motivated myth, and it's a means of lowering people's guard and to get them to uncritically accept the massive expansion of government power and taxes. It's a means of getting us to willingly surrender our freedom. It's as simple as that.
Wow. Well, that was very concisely put. And I think we have some things to really hang our hats on in terms of if we do hear this coming from the mainstream. The fact is we're not scientists. I mean, how am I supposed to know what's going on around the world? But, when you do have credible researchers or information that really puts the pieces together, you get the full picture, you can start to ask relevant questions and say, is this really happening or is it not? And I appreciate the work that you've done to really bring this to the forefront. So,
well, Kenneth, let me just interrupt there for a second. You say we're not scientists. That's true. Most of us are not. But most of the people who are putting out this myth are not scientists either. That is one of the most amazing things you find out. Go to that UN panel on intergovernmental panel on climate change and look at the list of people on that body. Most of them are not scientists, and the ones who are working for the government or for some corporation or some institution that benefits from this myth. But most of them aren't even scientists in the first place.
Right. Well, and there you go. Many of us who question climate change or global warming, we're talked down to, we're belittled, or we're disparaged, turned into some sort of pariah because we believe something or question something. And the fact is I'm glad that you're out there because, for many people, they need some sort of authority to appeal to. And I know you're saying you're not a scientist, but, you doing what you're doing is giving people the ability to have some sort of authority and say, hey, you know what, there are things that need to be really questioned, and I appreciate that. And so the next thing that I want to get to in this interview is just as important, and maybe even more important, the truth about cancer. And I'm not looking to get too detailed, too scientific on anything, but, what are some high-level things that, again, those of us who aren't scientists but care about our health and want to know what to do if we do get this horrible news about cancer, if our kids get cancer, I have a 4 and a 2-year-old. God forbid something happened like that happened to me. What are the questions that we should be asking? What are some of the important topics that, we should know regarding this evil thing called cancer?
It's a huge topic, Kenneth, and your questions are good. And it's hard to condense that body of experience and knowledge into a couple of minutes. But first, I should let your audience know that once again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I've never been to medical school. But I know how to talk to those people who have been. I've made friends with them. I've read their books. I've spent hundreds of hours talking to them or listening to their lectures, reading their papers. And so you have to do that if you're willing to stick your neck out and say, well, okay, I've looked into this, and this is my conclusion, and here are my reasons, and these are my references. So having said that, here's what I learned. A very good friend of mine, it was in the early 1970s, a good friend of mine was a medical doctor, an MD with a very fine practice in the San Francisco area, Dr. John Richardson. And we were social friends. And one day, Dr. Richardson asked me for some help. And I said, well, how can I help you, John? He said, well, look, I'm a doctor. I treat patients. You're a writer, and you communicate ideas. And I've come into a situation where I need some help to communicate an idea. Okay, what's that? Well, he said, I've been treating cancer with a substance that is very, very effective. And in fact, it's a quantum leap more effective than anything I have ever used or ever heard about in the medical profession. And it comes from nature. It's an herb, basically, an herbal concoction. And he said, I was very skeptical about it at first. I didn't really have any faith in it because I assumed, this is Dr. John speaking, he said, I assumed that if it was any good, I would have learned about it in medical school or read about it in the medical journals. Anyway, he said, I looked at it. My office manager told me about it, he said, and I looked at it, and I wasn't much interested in it. Until finally, he said, I realized that my dog was dying of cancer, and I had treated the dog with everything I could, and the dog was not going to make it. It was on its last legs. So someone suggested, well, why don't I give this to the dog and see if it made any difference? He said, well, sure, that's a good idea. And to everyone's amazement, the dog recovered. Well, this got their attention. With that, the next step was Dr. John's head nurse was concerned about her husband who had terminal cancer. Her husband had gone through everything that modern medicine could throw at cancer, and it was not doing a thing except weakening her husband. She was afraid he was going to die of the treatment before he died of the cancer. And she said, Dr. John, would you mind if we tried this on my husband? Well, that's getting a little iffy because it's a human being instead of a dog. But John said, well, yeah, what's there to lose? Your husband, unfortunately, is, he's not going to make it. So they tried it on her husband, and he recovered. Now they really got everybody's attention. And Dr. John began to use this substance very judiciously on a few of his cancer patients, very cautiously, with full disclosure, letting them know it was experimental, had no idea what was going to happen. And they were all in the last stages of cancer. They had nothing to lose. They accepted the proposition. And all of a sudden, Dr. Richardson had a huge cancer clinic, people coming from all over the world to be treated for their cancer because his cure rate was off the wall. He was curing people at an amazingly high rate when nobody else could even touch those numbers. And that's where I came into the picture. I was not aware of that at first. But he said, look, I'm in trouble now with the local medical association because I'm using a substance which is unapproved by the FDA. They have not given it their stamp of approval. Therefore, they say I am violating the law in using it, and they've ordered me to stop using it. And he says, I can't do that because I'm saving lives. It's like deliberately committing some people to the death sentence by not doing what I know has a high rate of success. He said, so I need to explain this. I'd like to have it published in a magazine or a newspaper someplace so the public can be aware of this, and maybe that'll take the pressure off of me a little bit. All right. I took too long to explain that, but it's important to know how I got into this.
Hmm.
I said, okay, well, sure, let me take a look at it. Well, I had no idea, Kenneth, what I was getting into. This was not my field. I had no medical background. Like everybody else, I assumed, well, I'm healthy. I hope I stay healthy, but if I get sick, I'm going to go to a doctor, and whatever he says, then
Mm-hmm.
that's what I will do. I had no idea that I had any responsibility for my own health, except to avoid drinking poison or something like that.
Sure.
So I took on the task. I had no idea the voltage, the high voltage that existed in that wire I was about to grab hold of. I discovered that the science of cancer therapy is not nearly as complicated as the politics of cancer therapy, because like so many things, we're dealing with an industry which, although it has this image of thousands or hundreds of thousands of well-trained professionals working day and night to try and solve this horrible cancer dilemma, trying to cure people of their cancer. The truth turned out to be something not quite so pleasant. The truth is that it became a cancer industry, and there was more money in treating cancer than there was in curing cancer. Because if you cure cancer, then the patient stops coming in, and their money flow stops. If you treat them for cancer and that doesn't work, but you continue to treat them and treat them and treat them and treat them until they're broke, now that's a business model. And that's what I discovered. That's what I discovered. It was horrible. And so now we come back to your question. What is this thing with cancer? I came to the conclusion, Kenneth, that cancer is a natural phenomenon. Everybody has cancer at all times, and it's not anything to be afraid of, because it's nothing more or less than the healing process that has gone out of whack. In other words, if you damage your body in any way, whether you cut yourself or you inhale some toxic chemicals and it kills some cells, your body goes to work right away to replace those damaged or killed cells, and that's the healing process. And it's rather complicated. I had to learn about it. It's all wrapped up with what they call the diploid totipotent cell. It's part of the embryonic process. It's part of the regenerative process, or what I'd like to just say, the healing process. And it's very complex at first, but once you get the whole picture, it's a beautiful mechanism of nature whereby the system calls into effect these, well, now they call them stem cells. Everybody has heard about those. Those cells can become any cell in your body. They have the capacity, the double the double capacity, that the helixes, they can become any cell in your body. It just depends on the electrical and chemical signals they receive and where they're located. So when you damage yourself, you go into instant healing. And when the healing is over, there are other signals that come into play that say, okay, the job is done, you can quit now. However, if for some reason the chemical or electrical processes that involved with that stop process, that stop signal, if they're not functioning correctly, then the body will not know that the healing process is completed, and it'll continue to heal and overheal. And all of a sudden we have this thing called cancer. This growth is an overhealing of a natural process that we shouldn't be afraid of. So the question is not, let me back off. Orthodox medicine looks at cancer like the lump or the bump. And they say, well, that's the cancer. So therefore, if we want to get rid of the cancer, all we have to do is get rid of the lump or the bump. And so they either cut it out, or they poison it away, or they burn it away with radiation. And then the doctor comes in and he says, well, Madeline, I think we got it all. Well, isn't that good news? They got it all. But 3 months later, it comes back. Why? Because they didn't get it all, because that wasn't even it. Now, the alternative doctors look at the lump or the bump not as the cancer, but as the symptom of the cancer. They say, what caused that lump or bump to grow? That's what we should be looking at. So now that's a whole different viewpoint that I had to learn from these other doctors and researchers. And it made a lot of sense to me. So now we come to the question of, well, what does cause that that overhealing process. Well, now we find out that there are a lot of things that could cause it, but there are two primary things. I don't want to get any, maybe I should sort of wind this up. One of the most important things is what's found in the diet. It's a substance found in nature. It's a chemical. It's called, in nature, it's called amygdalin. And it's found in about 1,400 edible plants. Plants that you and I probably wouldn't want to eat for the most part because they're bitter. It's like grass. If you've ever eaten grass, it's pretty bitter. Grass soup does not taste very good. I even had some once. But it's very nutritious for you, I might add. Grass is loaded with this stuff. And certain kernels of fruits and seeds, they're very bitter, like if you bite the seed of an apple. Your grandmother said, oh, don't eat the seed of the apple. You know, it's got cyanide in it or whatever. It'll poison you. It's very bitter. And sure enough, it's very bitter. But those are the foods that do contain this substance called amygdalin. Now, it turns out if you look at that substance chemically, as a lot of chemists and researchers have done, it's an amazing little molecule. It's made up of 2 parts of glucose or sugar, 1 part of benzaldehyde, and 1 part of cyanide. Yep, there's the word, cyanide. Who would want to take something with cyanide in it? That's poisonous, isn't it? Well, yes and no. Cyanide is a gas. In its pure nascent form, it's a gas. We're not talking about the gas called cyanide. We're talking about the cyanide molecule that is bound with other molecules. It's not cyanide, it's cyano something, cyano blah, blah, blah. It means it's combined with other components, and it's no longer cyanide, it's a complex compound. That's the thing we're looking at. Now, for example, vitamin B12, its proper name is cyanocobalamin. Vitamin B12 has cyanide in it, but it's not dangerous. In fact, if you didn't have it, you would die. It's essential for your life when it's in combination with other things. And that's what they don't tell you. They just want to scare you away from eating anything with cyanide in it, even though it might be the most effective thing you need to cure your cancer. So the question is, what would cause this cyanide to be released from the molecule? Then it could be toxic. And the answer to that, and I'll cut short to the chase here, the answer to that is an enzyme. And the enzyme is called beta-glucosidase. And that enzyme indeed will break apart the amygdalin molecule, release the cyanide, release the benzaldehyde, which also is toxic, and do its dirty job. So you got to be worried about that enzyme. Where is that? Well, that enzyme is found in cancer cells, and only in cancer cells. Isn't that something? There's a beautiful mechanism of nature that we've been looking for. The scientists say they've been looking for, but they don't really want it from nature because you can't patent anything in nature. But they found it in nature and they know how it works. It is selective against cancer and it's almost free. It comes off of the trees of apricots and apples and so forth. And this is the problem, Kenneth. When you find a control for cancer that comes from nature, even though it was designed apparently to do that specific job, the pharmaceutical industry is not interested in it at all because they can't patent it. What they want is something that can be patented, and they won't really cure the cancer, but will just keep the patient alive. So they got to keep coming back for more treatments and more treatments and more treatments until they're broke. Now that's what I learned, and that's what my book was all about, which is called World Without Cancer.
That's powerful. And you mentioned something there. I'm not sure if anyone caught that. I'm sure a few did. But you said you can't patent something that's in nature. And that actually leads me to my final question here, which relates to all of this. We've been doing a lot of research here at Crusher Street regarding cannabis and the trend. Obviously, there's a mass legalization happening all around the world, but many are attributing the natural healing of and remedying cancer with the use of cannabis. And I'm just curious if you've done any research on this and if you're familiar with any of the health benefits in regards to cannabis and its link to assisting with cancer.
Kenneth, I have to some small extent. I have not had the time to plunge in and do the kind of deep dive research that I did with amygdalin. That took me a couple of years. It seems like I just don't have time or the luxury of that sort of thing anymore. But I've read a lot of literature that's come across my desk on it. And as far as I can see, there's no doubt in my mind that this particular extract of cannabis is not the hallucinatory extract, but the more inert type, has tremendous health benefits. There's no question in my mind from the studies I've seen, and very low, if not zero, toxicity. It's low toxicity to be sure. So I see no downside and much upside to showing a great deal of interest in using it. The one thing I have not seen so far is any kind of an explanation as to how it works. I'm sure it's out there. I just haven't been able to look for it. I would like to see if there is any research as to how that molecule works in the treatment of cancer and so many other diseases as well. It's not just restricted to cancer. It has an effect on blood pressure, anxiety, diabetes, and all of these other things. So I suspect that it's not specific. Like amygdalin is specific on something related to one enzyme that exists in cancer cells only. That's highly specific. I have a feeling that with cannabis, there's something on a broader scale, such as stimulation of the immune system or improvement of circulation or something like that. But I have yet to see that research.
Well, everyone, we had the great pleasure to host G. Edward Griffin today at Crush the Street. Sir, if you would, please tell everyone about what you're doing. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, where they can get your books, and just some closing thoughts as we close out this interview here. And again, thank you for coming on Crush the Street.
Well, yeah, thanks for that, Kenneth. Actually, I'm very weak at closing off with the call to action. My people here in the office say, "Well, you didn't tell them how to reach us," or anything like that. Oh, yeah, I forgot.
I want to make sure we do that. So giving you the opportunity. Again, thank you so much.
So, okay, well, thank you. We have a commercial site where we sell books and recordings on all of the things I've talked about and so much more. We have about 100 different items there, excellent material, and that's called The Reality Zone. So that's realityzone.com. That's our commercial site, and it's like a online bookstore, exactly what it is. But we have other places where we don't have anything to sell except ideas. And that's where my life is really, most of my time is spent. Right now, I'm deeply involved in something called the Red Pill University. Now, that sounds like it's kind of a hokey thing, maybe. But it turns out that the red pill, take the red pill and see reality. That meme has become popular since the release of that sci-fi movie called The Matrix. I think many people have seen it. Anyway, it has a very poignant meaning for the real world today. Most of us, throughout most of our lives, have been living in a matrix of illusion. The things we thought about our government, about our healthcare system, about our judicial system, about politics, about everything, even about sociology and history. We find out if we really dig into it that, whoops, somebody has tampered with the facts and they've twisted the story in order to engineer our opinions about something or other. So Take the Red Pill is really quite an interesting and accurate meme for us. So we decided to use it. So we've had 2 annual Red Pill expos so far. The first one was last year in Bozeman, Montana, and the second one this year in Spokane, Washington. And they've been just outrageously successful. People have come from all over the world, actually, not to hear about any one specific thing. This is not a health conference or a patriotic conference or a religious conference or anything like that. This is about the red pill. This is about all of the deceptions that under which we live. And we invite people of all different viewpoints. We don't necessarily agree with all of them. In fact, I can assure you we don't agree with everything that everybody has to say. But that's not the point. We're not there to be the arbiters and the censors of information. We're there to hear what people have to say, because, every time we have taken a red pill, I'm speaking for myself now, every time I have taken a red pill, I've had to abandon some preconceived ideas, and it was hard. But when that red pill went down, I said, oh my gosh, look at the facts. I've been fooled. So anyway, we invite people from wide perspectives to the conference, to the Red Pill Expo, and also the best of them we invite to be faculty at the Red Pill University. So what I'm trying to say, Kenneth, is that anybody who's interested in the things such as we're talking about, dispelling the illusions, the big illusions of life, and hearing what other people have to say, what they've discovered about what the reality really is, I urge you, please, to come and take a look at what we've created. It's called the Red Pill University, and it's redpilluniversity.org. Now, granted, be prepared. The website is sort of new. There are a lot of things that are under development there, but please be patient and maybe just help us along a little bit while we flesh it out. But we're started now, and we're going to have the greatest collection of faculty there that you can possibly imagine. Most of the great teachers, most of the great crusaders in the world now, especially in America, are being squeezed off of the internet. They're being dropped out completely, or they're being shadow banned, or their advertising revenue is being denied to them. The people who want to perpetuate the deceptions that I'm talking about do not want the truth out there. And so we're trying to provide a new platform where they can come, they can prosper, and where everybody around the world can come and get the full truth. So check us out. I think you're going to like it. It's called redpilluniversity.org.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for coming on Crush the Street. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, Kenneth, for inviting me. And anytime you want to talk, let's do it again.